All right. I don't know if there's a time limitation here, so we may or may not have lunch. But I'm just kidding. I'm having to be very, very measured about what to share with you guys because there's a lot in life, and I don't want to just tell you my life story. I really want to maybe, if I'm able to, share with you how I've gone through some pretty. Maybe not dramatic, but just substantial changes in life growing up in the way that I thought and believed and looked at life and that kind of thing. So, and this, I'm fine with this being a little bit interactive. So if there's a curiosity that you have while I'm kind of sharing some things, then feel free to wave at me or something, get my attention, and that way I can address your question or otherwise. I'll try not to embarrass my children. Just kidding. But I think that most of you, I mean, obviously I have a lot of family here. You're familiar with my life in a certain way. You know, my sister's probably the most familiar with my life from the youngest age. And have you shared your testimony yet? She hasn't? Maybe you should go first. I'm just kidding. But Kim and I were raised in actually a really wonderful home. Our parents came to know the Lord when they were young. My mom, very young. My dad, throughout his younger years. And then I think he committed his life to the Lord when he was, 17 or 21 or something like that. And anyway, when they met in college and then moved to Texas, and I was born in St. David's Hospital in Austin, and that actually two. Noah and Naomi were both born in St. David's. Maybe one of them in the same room that I was. But anyway, nothing funny. But Kim and I were both miracle births. Isn't that kind of funny? My mom was not supposed to be able to have children. And so we were very much treasured by her and my dad. And, my parents were very much involved in church and other things growing up. Not just participants, but typically, moving toward and active in church leadership. I'm sharing this because that made up a lot of my early engagements in life were in three primary contexts for me personally. One was our home life, obviously. My mother, when we were in elementary school, she educated herself as a nurse, went to nursing school, and would work through the nights over the weekends so that my dad can continue to work as well, but also so that she could take care of us at home and not actually have to have us go anywhere else. So my mom really invested a lot of time in our lives, and much of what home life was like was, from a spiritual standpoint, my mom was always telling us stories from the scriptures and familiarizing us with things in the Bible and things like that. And then, of course, so that was one context at home. The other was at church. We went to church very regularly and were participants in various activities that the church offered. That was mostly Grace Covenant Church in Austin. And then for me, before and during school, a lot of my time was spent with my dad. My dad at the time was selling used cars, of all things. And so he and I, most of what he did was fix cars. And so me and him he would be fixing something and I would be watching him. And my dad used to always say, because I remember he was always in some sort of project, and I don't think he's ever changed. He's always in a project, but he would always say, don't ever have anyone else do something that you can do yourself. And so that was a principle that through his and through my observation of him, and I learned a lot. I learned a lot about how things work and how to fix things and how to do things, whatever else. This is not just a story about my life. I'm building a context for the way that I began to think as a young man. Now, I was not a big guy. I was a small guy, a very little guy. In fact, my nickname was Little Timmy. So, and that's what, I had a lot of nicknames at school and whatever else because of my shortness. How about that? Anyway, but I was also, from a very young age, I know that the way that I thought was typically, without thinking that I was thinking this way, I know that I thought that I considered things in life in the right way. Everything was about right or wrong, good or bad, that kind of thing. And that actually made me I think I was honest to a fault. I actually got in trouble in school a number of times, not because I got caught, but because I brought myself forward. In kindergarten, I got the school that I went to, they would call what it was, at the end of the year, they would hand out what they called Dove Awards. Dove Awards. Now, it's a Christian school, so the Dove was correlated to an award that was something related to spiritual character. And that year, I got an award for honesty. And I think my teacher gave it to me because of my upfrontness about my own shortcomings. So I was always honest about everything. So, but that was true. My parents could also testify that I can't tell a lie. So that it was really a good thing for that not to work out well early in life, because it just never became a habit. And but I think as I became a young man, some interesting things started to happen in my elementary and junior high years, and that's when I began to recognize that there was a difference between the way that I looked at life and the way that maybe some other people looked at life. I didn't realize until maybe my elementary and junior high years that there were those who were not like me in my faith and in my moral standard, but what I thought was right or wrong. And so I didn't recognize the difference until, in those same years, I would have other classmates or other people in school come to me, or while they're talking to me, apologize either for their attitude or for their language or whatever it was. Oh, I'm so sorry. And they would always add, I know you don't do that. Well, what's interesting about that is I never told anybody what I did and didn't do. I didn't go around saying you shouldn't cuss or you shouldn't be ugly like that or whatever else. It was actually a surprise to me when people would apologize to me, because I didn't know why they apologized to me, so I ended up telling people that, don't apologize to me, apologize to God. It's the offense is not against me. I'm not the one offended here. That sounds really good, right? Sounds like I was a good person. But what was developing in me, I think, was a real central, deep pride in the way that I perceive myself and other people. And it would be many years before I would have any idea that that was something that was impacting my life. Many years. Maybe at least 10 years. Maybe 20 years from that point. Because that would have started, maybe 15 years. That would have started in my early teens, and wouldn't be recognized until I was in my early 20s. So the other thing that really, I think, substantiated some of my outlook in life was my ability. Now, again, I was a small person, but what that caused me to do was to make an extra effort all the time. So whether that came to, participation in certain things related to school, academics, and especially in the arena of activities like sports. I really enjoyed playing soccer, basketball in particular. and really wanted to excel in those things, but that was very difficult to do as a person who was looked down upon because of my stature. And so, I became quite skilled in those things to make up for the opinions of others. All of that served not really as an accomplishment for me, but as a means of kind of creating a mindset that there wasn't much that I couldn't do. And so I initially, I'm going to back up a little bit. I initially, gave my life to the Lord as a very young man. I don't know how old I was. I think I was 4 or 5 years old. And there was a recognition of my need and a godly fear of judgment, and a need to have some sort of help for the sinful condition of my life. But again, that didn't become reality until much later in life. Most of my pursuits in high school and even early college were relational pursuits. I had a pretty heavy concern for who my wife would be and when I would get married and when I would have a family. And that became quite a focus for me from my latter high school years, probably from about 10th grade all the way through the time that I was married. Sometimes I wrestled with that so much that I wished that I could just temporarily not exist and wake up and have everything that happened. I used to bargain with God a lot. I used to say, God, if I could just fast forward to the time where I have a family and I'm married and whatever else, he said, and I would bargain. I'd be like, I still will remember everything that I went through, all the hardship and whatever else. But if you could just put me there now.
Does it happen?
No, I don't know, because I remember everything. Maybe he did do that. I don't know. But I will tell you that I had my first kind of crisis in life, something that really impacted my person, was my senior year in high school. And it wasn't a dramatic or traumatic event. It was when it came time for me to decide what I was supposed to do with the rest of my life, educationally or career or otherwise. And it may sound like a pitiful story, but all of my friends, so a lot of my friends in church, which I will say that not many of my friends in church were necessarily a good spiritual influence. They weren't bad, they were just neutral. They were just people that did religious things just like I did. And so we didn't go do bad things, immoral things, destructive things, but there was not really anything in any relationship that I had that was spiritually productive. I want to be very clear about that. These people shared the same beliefs in God and moral standards in life, but none of us were really offering any spiritual input. The only spiritual input that I had was a couple of Bible study leaders who were interested in my life, but I can't remember more than maybe 2 or 3 conversations that I ever had with any of them about my personal spiritual life. So there wasn't a lot of input there. The way that I was raised in Christianity was really that growth and maturity came through an expansion of your knowledge and understanding of the scriptures themselves. And so that was something that I was always keen to. I was very absorbent to those things, to Bible knowledge, history, events, and even principle lessons, moral lessons in life. But there was not anyone that was really influential in my life spiritually. I think my parents held a very good standard in not just a moral standard, but I think principle standard. I don't want to make this sound like my parents were not spiritual people or that they were not God-loving people. They certainly were. and they were offering me the best that they knew how. But like coming to this point where I had to make a decision in life. And your decision about your long-term education and career is a pretty big decision in life. I mean, that can mean you're moving out of the home. It can mean a lot of different things. And as I said, most of the friends that I had were either a grade higher or lower. All of my friends, I graduated from a very small school. My graduating class in my high school was only 12 people. And I only knew maybe 2 or 3 of those 12 who were staying in Austin for college. And interestingly, while I had plenty of friends among those 12 and other classes in the school that I went to, I very rarely had any connection with them throughout the summer months. So there was no really long-term relationship. It was an in-class or in-activity type of relationship, not a long-term relationship. I only had 1 or 2 long-term relationships ever in my life. And so when it came to make this decision, I didn't know what to do with my life. I was completely very exasperated by that decision, and my parents knew that. My mom suggested one day, well, why don't we go to the library and look at the careers aisle and just see if anything stands out to you. And I remember I was in the Austin Public Library on the east side branch off Lamar, and I was so overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do with my life. I tried to look ahead in my life, and I could see nothing. I felt like a total failure. Really. Because, I mean, what a loser. I didn't even know what direction to go in my life. And I can remember that day, I sat down in the middle of the floor of a public library with a book in my hand and just cried. I just cried. I didn't know what to do with my life. And my mom said, well, you know, I've got a nursing degree. It's a good paying career. And, you know, healthcare is a good industry to go into. Maybe you should consider that. I mean, she wasn't trying to be influential or forceful or anything like that. And I tell you what, I felt like I was signing over my life to the very thing that it wasn't that I didn't want to do it, but it was like I was settling. And I remember thinking, okay, I guess that's what I'll do. My life's just going to be this boring. I'm not going to be anybody. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to have this. I got to do all this education now and then have a career and whatever. So I consigned to that. I started to go to a local college. Again, all my friends had left to go to other schools out of town. And even friends at church were older than me and had already gone out of town. So I started that. And I'm telling you, I just really felt lost. I went to a public college. I'm not a very outgoing person, very, very shy. And so didn't really want to talk to anybody, didn't want to be noticed by anybody. And it was really lonely. Really lonely. And, you know, I was taking some introductory courses and then started in pre-med. Well, one of my long-term relationships, a young man named Wes, had gone to a school down south. And, you know, I decided maybe I wanted to switch my career path. And got some really bad advice from a young school advisor at that school. Lost like 12 hours, which is a lot of money and time. Dropped the classes that I was in because I was having a really hard time with them. And basically started all over with my schooling down at Southwest Texas University. While I was there, you know, I engaged with a group of Christian young people through an organization called, what's it called? Campus Crusade. Which is a very evangelistic organization. The Campus Crusade is all about getting the message of heaven and hell out and wanting to enable people to make a decision to follow Christ so that they can not go to hell, but go to heaven. And that was very much in line with my form of Christianity and the way that I was taught in the church that I was raised. I was a participant in a lot of mission trips. to Mexico, locally in Austin. I went to Russia for mission trips. And I will tell you that the impact of those trips had very little spiritual impact over my life, but they did have a big impact on my life in being able to see people in other countries and other cultures and their life situations. That was probably the greatest impact that those things had. And it was also a means of taking me out of my comfort zone. Now, when I was trying to figure out what I can do, that was a real attempt in my part to hear from God in a way that I had never heard, and I didn't hear from God. And that's why I kind of just did the best I could and chose that path. Now I'm at a college and taking courses that I just barely got because I registered late, and I took some really weird classes. And
Like what?
like women and minorities in the media. Yeah. I was the only male in the class. It was a class of about 8 people, and all they talked about was women's rights and how terrible men are and whatever else. Yeah. Well, we had to give a speech in that class, and I gave up, and the title of my speech was How Men Have Failed the American Family. And that pretty much silenced everybody. The gist of the speech was the God-given place of a husband and a father in a household, and how that role has not been fulfilled by modern men in today's culture. And again, the professor and the young ladies that were in that class didn't respond very, very much to that speech, because they wanted to criticize everything. I accepted all of their criticism and then offered the true solution, and that didn't go over well. So, I did some bold things like that, but again, I don't know that they were, well, maybe they were just for me and not for others. God was doing something. One of the things that Campers Crusade did on an annual basis is they had what was called what was the big retreat in Dallas?
Dallas Winter Conference.
The Winter Conference. The founder, Bill Bright, spoke. This was, I think, just prior to his death. Now, I want to start to line some things up for you on how God began to really do things in my life without me knowing. This I knew, though. I was at that Winter Conference. You know, I was doing all kinds of activities. I was already working in ministry with my dad before I went to that school. After, I kind of began to think at this point that I wanted to work with my father in ministry back in Austin. And that was not something that was available to me for a number of reasons. But at this conference, Bill Bright got up and he spoke to a very large number of students. And he basically said this in short order. That's not his exact words, but he said, we have plenty of doctors, we've got plenty of lawyers, we have plenty of whatever of these various professions. But what we don't have enough of are people who have given their lives wholly over to service for Christ. And something hit me so hard when he said that. That night, I committed to God my life for service. I mean, there was a conviction of the Spirit there that was palpable. I could feel it. For everyone else, it was another night at the Winter Conference. Someone else sharing a speech, but that really impacted my life in a way. It wasn't necessarily, God used the words of this man that was speaking, but he touched my heart in a way that since the time that I didn't know what to do with my life, now I knew what to do with my life. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I knew it was going to be for. And that was when I was probably 19 years old. And so I left that school and wanted to find a Bible school to go to, seminary. We're not a wealthy family. We couldn't afford expensive schools, so I ended up finding a school in Dallas to go to. My parents actually were hesitant and supportive. They were hesitant because they said, do you see what the demographics are at this school, which is like, it's like 95% men over 40. And you're a 19-year-old young man, you know, going into life, you're not going to have any social interaction. You're not going to have any peers. You're not going to have any other people to relate to. So they were really concerned about that. And interestingly, I had chosen to go to this particular school because I had in mind a young lady that I wanted to pursue a little bit. And that pursuit lasted about 5 days into my move into Dallas. And I never heard from her again. Never. So I think she fell in love with Shane and Shane, and that was that. So yeah, she knew them. She had come to one of our summer camps, and we had some really deep conversation about life and what life would be and those things. And so that was what I really liked about this person. Anyway, we met once for breakfast, and I never heard from her again. So that was that. So now I'm alone in Dallas. I don't have any friends. I was supposed to have a roommate in this apartment that I couldn't afford to help pay the rent. And he dropped a bag off one day when I wasn't there and never showed up again, ever. Never paid a bill, never came into the place, never called me, nothing. And so even my supposed roommate, I was there in this apartment for 6 months, and I had no one. Dallas is a huge city. There were not smartphones. When I moved to Dallas, I think I had just gotten a cell phone. Previous, I only had a pager, okay? And there were no maps. There was no GPS. If you wanted to go somewhere, you had to get lost really good to find your way back. Or you had to be really good, have a nice printer, and print out maps on MapQuest. And I remember being so upset and afraid. And at this point, I'm alone. What's the Chinese statement, Emmanuel? When you're in that trouble, you cry out to your parents. If you can't cry out to your parents, you cry out to God. Oh man, was I crying the blues. I couldn't go home too often. It was a 3-hour trip, so maybe once or twice a month. And I was just left alone. I can't tell you guys how many tears I shed in that little apartment. And my heart really turned to God. I didn't know who else to look to. I wrote a song. I didn't write a song. I made up a few chords that I can't even remember to the end of Psalm 73, which is a lament of, I think, either Asaph or Korah or somebody, about the troubles in the world and why God allows those things and whatever else. But the end of that psalm says, "Whom have I in heaven but you?" And it says something about, though my flesh might fail and whatever else, I'm going to look to the Lord. And that became very much a theme for me in my time of loneliness. Thank God I was able to meet some other young people, and eventually I moved out of that apartment and lived with these other guys. That was a very interesting experience. The stories could get really long. I won't. There were a lot of fun things, a lot of difficult things, a lot of challenging things. One thing that I did enjoy about that, this is very surface level spiritual thing, but I want to just to give context to the way that young people, believers thought in that day. You know, the best that me and these guys could do, they were all Christians. They were all from Houston. They came to the same school. And we would have what we called an accountability group, and we would meet weekly and confess our sins to one another, and then literally make up punishments for one another based on our failures. So those times together would be answering questions like, have you openly shared the gospel with anyone this week? And if you hadn't, then you get a punishment. Or have you had impure thoughts? Or have you gotten angry? Or whatever those things are, you need to confess that here And we're going to manage those behaviors by punishing one another. That's us sharpening one another. That was probably the greatest extent of moral shaping that I had in those college years. And again, I didn't have wild years and do things that I shouldn't really. It was just being around these people. I actually started my own ministry in Dallas and worked with children in the inner city there in Dallas, which was very eye-opening as well. But most of that Dallas experience was a very lonely experience until, of course, I met my wife, Rachel, in Dallas at the church that I was going to. But very young, naive, both of us. Rachel and I met each other having... I want to add one other thing, that in this stage of my life, prior to going to Dallas, but after the Lord really spoke to me about where He wanted my life committed, I had a very renewed interest in Scripture, and began to really spend a lot of time reading in the Bible. And that was, in a way, something that always was like a tag on me my whole life. I remember as a very, very young boy, I think I still have this Bible somewhere. It was I think in Christianity it's very traditional to gift a child at birth a Bible. And this was a Bible that was gifted to me at birth, and I've had it my whole life until my little dog, Coconut, chewed the cover off of it. But I still have it. But I can remember as a boy, prior to being able to read, so at a very young age, having a very much a level of reverence for the Bible. Sometimes as a little boy, I would just stare at the pages for long periods of time and imagine that I could understand what was in the Scriptures. And the one thing that I knew, even though I couldn't read, my little Bible was a red letter edition, if you know what that means. It means that the words in the New Testament that were said by Christ are printed in red ink rather than black ink. And so I used to really stare at those letters a lot, those red letters. Didn't know what they said. I would even write as if I was writing what the Scripture was, but it was just scribbles. I didn't know what I was writing either. But I always imagined myself understanding the truth of the Bible. So, now after having gone to school and being formally taught how to approach the Scriptures, study the Scriptures, learn the language behind the Scriptures, and be able to have some discussions with regular conversations with other people at school and outside the context of college, that education, about spiritual principles, truths, doctrines of the faith, all these things that kind of make up Christianity. You know what? I graduated college, and I said this to myself and others. I don't know everything, but I think I know the right way. And to me, that was, and I mean this sincerely, it wasn't just a statement. I really considered myself to have some level of humility in that understanding, because I knew I had a lot to learn, but I thought I had really the right foundation. And now wanted to set out and live my life in a certain way, which I was not able to do initially. Rachel was, her family was very well established in Dallas, and so the first year of our marriage, we had a lot of, maybe the first 6 months, a lot of conversations about my desire to move back to Austin and work closer to my dad and do those things, which those were not shared desires initially. So Rachel and I had a pretty difficult time with that for a long while, and then I left it alone and ultimately said, basically, that's just the way, that's not going to change in the way that I feel. And then something changed in her heart at some point, and she opened that door. So we moved to Austin. I actually I took a job as a teacher at a Christian school and was teaching church history and apologetics. And anyway, ultimately, I went from that job to work with my dad at Mission Possible. And not long after that, that would have been 2002-ish, 2 or 3, that I started to work at Mission Possible. And of course, Noah was born. Rachel was pregnant with Noah while I was still teaching at the church school. And that was a big change in my life, this young man. And a lot of things came together at this point in my life. I'm sorry for all the detail. But Noah's birth and early first year or two of life was also the year that something started to happen inside me that I didn't even know how to recognize at first. But I knew something was changing. That was also the same year, that same year range that I met Brother Emmanuel not long ago. When did you move to the U.S., brother? 2000? So he moved to the U.S. the same year we were married. And I met him a couple years later. So he had gone through a lot of the early hardship that he had faced in life. But we didn't know each other yet. And these stirrings that were going on in my life, God used a lot of things to do that. One, my own pride, my own knowledge, my own idea that I knew what I was doing. And I was also, with Mission Possible, I was working with a lot of other believers who did not share the same beliefs that I had. And as a young man and being extremely rigid and judgmental in the way that I believed, my default was that if someone didn't believe in the way that I did, they were just wrong. Not a very healthy way. Not a good way to think. Causes a lot of conflict in your inner man and a lot of conflict with people be outside you as well. Sometimes people close to you. And but what I began to recognize, God began to open my eyes up to other people's lives. So maybe for the first time, maybe because of being in the middle of people a lot, being in front of people a lot, and also having another life, being married, and then having a child, and beginning to look at life beyond myself, something started to shift inside of me. And I couldn't explain it. There were things that happened that were just things that you would see in life on any given day, but they would impact me in the inner man in a different way. And one of the very first experiences that I had with the person of Jesus Christ came in that period of my life. I was still studying books, reading books, studying the scriptures, doing those things. But I remember this one experience in particular that I want to share with you. And maybe two, because they came really close to one another. But I had this church history book that I had read in college, and I was rereading again. And I came to this section in, I can't remember if it was the first or second volume, but it's a blue book. And I had read it some time before, and it was the martyrdom of Polycarp. Polycarp was a believer who was a leader among some other Christians during the time of persecution, the Roman persecution. And ultimately he was burned at the stake. And his testimony was, the account of his martyrdom is pretty interesting, because the onlookers said his body wouldn't burn, and that it smelled like baking bread, and that because his body didn't burn, they thrust spears into him, and when they did so, the blood poured out to such an extent that it quenched the flames. That put some idea in my mind about martyrdom that I had also read the DC Talk put out. What was that book called?
Jesus Freaks.
Huh?
Jesus Freaks.
Jesus Freaks. But it was about the martyrs. That story was in there as well. So I had this implanted idea that, if that was the lot that God had for my life, that he would do something glorious in that same way and somehow miraculously enable me to. And I don't know, you have these weird thoughts sometimes. So I had actually stopped reading that book, put it back on my bookshelf. All these things were happening at the same time. So like something's changing in me. I don't know what it is. I don't understand it. I actually have a journal entry in 2005 where I wrote about that. Something's happening inside me. I'm thinking differently. I feel different about the things that I experience in life. With people, the things I observe, what's going on. I didn't know what was going on. And we also were still going to a church at the time, and there was a pastor that came from another country. He was from the country of Turkey. And he actually spent a lot of time describing the hardships of those who follow Christ in this country where there's a lot of persecution. And he detailed some stories about those who lost their lives in those environments. And then he actually very formally and directly invited some of those of us who sat in the seats of that building to come and die for Christ. And it put a fear in my heart a little bit. I didn't know if I could do that, but I kind of thought, the Lord would, if the Lord wants me to do that, then I would do that, and he would take care of it. Just trying to let you guys see how I think a little bit, and how God knows how you think, and what he can do. So this is probably within a few week period of all of this happening. So one night I had come out of taking a shower one evening, and I came out of the bathroom, which was connected to our bedroom, and my office was on one side and our bedroom was on the other side, and near my office on the wall was a big bookshelf. And I walked past that bookshelf. These were very interesting experiences for me. I had never experienced things like this before. But that blue book stuck out of the shelf like something I couldn't pass up. So just out of pure curiosity, I went over and grabbed the book. And I opened it to where I had last been because there was some sort of bookmark there. And when I did, I went directly into what was more than just a vision experience. I don't know where I was, but I was in the presence of Jesus Christ. And we were sitting at a small table. Now, I had opened that book. I saw the martyrdom, the story of the martyrdom of Polycarp again. But that's what took me directly into this experience with Jesus. And Jesus had a cup in front of him. And he looked at that cup and he pushed it over to me. And when you have an experience with Jesus, you will find that he can speak to you with very clear words and not even move his lips. Not that he can do that. But I could understand everything that was in his heart, in his mind. Not all of his knowledge and omnipotence and omniscience. But I knew what he was thinking toward me. I knew the words that he had to say to me. And what he said to me through his face and through the words of his heart were, I want you to drink this cup. And I couldn't do it. I had to deny Christ. I couldn't do it. There was a lot of pride that melted in me that day. Because when the one who I profess to love asked me to give him my life, I couldn't do it. I just fell to the floor and wept. I didn't feel very important anymore in myself. And I kind of didn't know what to do with that experience. But Jesus has a way of humbling you with truth. You can't deny truth. I can't deny truth. I don't know that I had a lot. I was just very unsettled by that experience. I didn't share it with many people because it was humiliating. That would be something, not really good to share with other people. That you're a Christian, that you're a leader in certain circles, and you can't even really give your life for Christ. The Lord came to me another time. It was very much in the same period of time, because we had recently dedicated Noah's life to the Lord in front of the church, and it was in that same room, almost in the same spot. And I ended up somehow, I don't remember the circumstance, but I ended up again face to face with Jesus. And in this experience, which was more than a vision, I'm telling you, it was more than a vision, because the presence of Christ is so real. It's so real. Young people, if you have not experienced the presence of Christ, you need to set your hope to be able to have such an interaction with Him. He's not unwilling. But He will do that. So, Jesus came to me, and I was in, again, a place I don't know where I was. And I was holding Noah as an infant. And again, Jesus spoke, this time, again, without any words, simply through an expression, but with very clear words. He put his hands out. Obviously, the gesture indicated that He wanted me to give Noah to him. So, here I am, openly dedicating my child in front of hundreds and hundreds of people at church. It's beautiful. He's wearing a beautiful gown. It's what you do. This is Christianity. We raise our children in a certain way. But Jesus came to me, and He asked for my son. And I couldn't give him to him. My body was trembling. I tried. I was shaking like this. I couldn't do it. I wanted to do it, but I couldn't do it. It's kind of funny, because Jesus looked at me with some humor on His face. But it was a compassion. He knew what I felt. He knew what He was asking. He knew my reservation. It was, just when you're in the presence of Jesus, guys, there's nothing hidden. Sorry. You can't hide anything from Christ. He knows the depths of you. But He looked at me and He actually spoke. His lips moved. There was a voice. And it was he was so compassionate. And what He said was this: Tim, don't you know that I love Noah more than you? And again, I'm maybe a pretty weak person. I just melted to the floor. I gave him my son. But I felt like I had given my life away. So that was quite an impactful experience for me with the Lord. It was very unconventional. Again, I didn't share that with many people. That was not the context of Christianity that I was raised in. The Christianity I was raised in was not really giving any attention to spiritual experiences, dreams, visions, visitations. You know, God's someone that you know about, that you learn about, that you follow, but not really that you see or hear. So those were very unsettling things for me because I was pretty set in my ways of thinking. I had met Emmanuel by this time. Emmanuel was a complete enigma to me. But I'm mentioning him not because of his presence here only, but because my observation of his life was very much had an impact on me, mainly because I thought the guy was crazy and a little unwieldy in his ways of spiritual development. So it was something that I couldn't help but look at. If for nothing else, just to see what happens. But see, God was doing some weird stuff with me too. One day I was preaching at church under the bridge, and this was another moment of substantial impact on my life. I'm sure you guys have heard some of this before, but I was preaching one Sunday. So I'm outside under the bridge in Austin in front of a few hundred people. Words are coming out of my mouth through a microphone over the speakers, and God speaks to me right inside my inner man. I'm still speaking. He's talking. And he says, "Tim, you know a lot about me, but you don't know who I am." I was probably 27 by then, maybe 27, 28. That was a showstopper, guys. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't actually respond to God with excuses. Because, again, truth is truth. And somehow when God said it, there was no arguing. Not even in my mind with myself. I knew instantly that that was truth. And what I thought that I knew about God didn't matter because he said it didn't matter. Or that it didn't count as knowledge of him. So my response to God eventually was, okay, then how do I know you? That kind of response to the Father gives him some opportunity to teach. None of what God taught me was easy. From that point on, I began to have dreams, visions, things that no one around me understood. That went on for about a year, maybe 2 years, until the Lord decided that Emmanuel and I's relationship would take a little bit of a shift because, as it turned out, he was the only person in my entire life that was even willing to hear such an experience. And it actually was similar to some of the things that he had experienced with the Lord. So he had already had some level of understanding and experience of how God speaks. Everyone else in my life said, "Nah." Not long after that, some very difficult trials in my life were going to unfold. And not because I could not have controlled them, but because God ordained them. Me and my dad did a little bit of a youth retreat up in Arkansas. And toward the end of that, a young lady, age 13, came to me with a prophetic word. Something that was completely unfamiliar to me. In short, she said, the trials of Job are about to come upon your life. And God wants you to know that it's not because he disapproves of you, but because he wants to prove you. No one in my life, not even the pastors of that little church, who were spiritual people, charismatic, they basically instantly sloughed it off and said, oh, that's nothing, it's just a little girl. But it stuck with me. One of my spiritual mentors back in Austin, I took that to him. It was very troubling to me, very unsettling to me. And his response was, oh, that's bad. That's all I got. And what would unfold through a series of prophetic words, dreams, and visions during that season of my life was for God to reveal to me that the life that I had set before me was not the life that He wanted me to live. That was really difficult for me. There are very few people in this world that I have been nearer to than my father. And I was at a place in my life where we were able to work together in our own understanding to do the will of God together, to have some effect on other people's lives for the sake of God's kingdom and name together. And what was very regularly being revealed to me through these various means, not just my own dreams and visions, but through spiritual unction from others, was that was going to change. And I cannot tell you guys how unsettling that was for me. I was feeling like, again, I didn't know what my life was going to be. It was during that time that, and I can remember one specific time in my living room in our house in Texas, as I knelt down on the floor and cried out to God. No one was home. And the Lord spoke to me again. God speaks a lot, by the way. And He said, I want you to be a priest for me. I didn't know what that meant. I had no clue what that meant. But I knew what my life was set apart for. God can change you dramatically in any way that He chooses, obviously. My hope for you guys is that you will be... My purpose in sharing certain things is not to... I do want to share with you where I had some success and not just where I had failures. I had a lot of failures. A lot of failures. Personal and in life. I don't know that most of those are very constructive. But I do know where certain postures of my heart were that gave opportunity through a certain season of my life for God to do something in my life. I remember back in college when I was with those young men, and there were times and occasions where we would just set some time apart for prayer. I remember one time going into the back room of this apartment, and a couple of the guys were praying, and I came in to join them. And I prayed out loud, and I just asked God to break me. And literally those guys got up and backed away. They said, you should not pray like that. God's going to do that. If you ask Him to do that, He's going to do it. He said, they said, we don't want to pray that way. But see, God has a way of doing that. If we let Him. There are many other trials, many other experiences that I could share. But there's a lot of other revelation too in terms of like things that God shifted in my mind and heart that changed the way that I thought. That changed the way ultimately that I believed and heard God. In many ways, I was raised not to hear God, but to perceive God through Scripture. And I still very much revere and approach the scriptures with reverence and awe, but not in the way that I was taught to. More so now because that person, the God of the Bible, the person, has directly touched, spoken to, visited my life. And that made quite a bit of difference in terms of the meaning, the value, and the understanding of the written Word of God. But so much more in terms of what our life is for. Maybe some other time I can share the testimonies that related to the last 15 years of life, which have been a lot of trial and hardship, continual. But ultimately coming in with a lot of questions, because much of what was still being shifted out of me, apart from the work of the inner man, was my placement, positioning, and assignment in the household of God. That was not something that was known or practiced yet. It was very much in a place of shaping and forming. Probably from the time of 2008 all the way up to probably the time of 2019, 2020. How about that?
10 years.
And then there has been some settlement, some understanding of why we, as humanity, as God's people, and even this community here, why are we here? What are we for? What does God have to do with that? And that is, part of the reason that we initiated this place, this time of gathering, was so that we could pass along with you guys not just our personal experiences, but a foundation of understanding of life and what life is about, what we're for, how God does things. You don't have to expect that God is going to do exactly with you and to you what He has done to me, with me, or with others here. But you can very much expect that God will speak to you, that God will reveal Himself to you, that He will give you direction, that He will bring conviction to your life if you'll let Him, if you will ask Him for it. God is not there just to fix you. He's not interested solely in making what is wrong in you right. He is more interested in you coming alongside Him in His work, in His thought, with the intention of His heart. That's kind of how we treat other people that we love and care for. We want to know about them. That's the expectation that we have of others who come near to us. That they understand how we think. That they will have the same sentiment about things that we do. And we do that in so many ways imperfectly. We're still distracted by the carnal life, the life in the world. So, we sometimes are misled to think that people need to share those same type of affections that we do. But we can have the same affection in Christ, in the purpose of God's kingdom, and in the righteous ways of life. That is a central point for God's people. It is the truth that brings us together as one, not us convincing each other of what we think. So I encourage you, ask God, seek, wait, anticipate that God will come to you in such a way. And be sincere in your request. Be sincere with yourself. Guys, you can deceive me with your words, with your actions, You cannot deceive God. That's not a warning. It's just a fact. When I stood before Jesus, there wasn't one occasion that I wasn't just undone. And I don't mean just a blubbering blob. That did happen too. But I mean there's no barrier there. There's no barrier. Everything is visible. Everything is known. Everything is seen. Jesus is unaffected by it. He's not troubled by your sin. He's not troubled by your troubles. He's not worried by your worries. He's not weighted by your weights. He is what God has always called himself. I am that I am. And there are occasions, there's a part of his presence that is very much that statement. This is me. What are you going to do about it? God's not going to change for you. But we can be changed by him. That's another wonderful reason to ask God to see his face, his presence. The scriptures tell us that when we are put face to face with God, we will be transformed by his gaze. That is true. That is true. Forever changed. That doesn't mean my life is without failure and shortcoming. Not at all. But I will never be the same. And I endeavor to never be the same. Day to day. And I endeavor more so to see that kind of transformation. There's a power behind that. I don't know if you've ever tried to change someone's mind. It's quite difficult when their mind is set. You're not going to change people's minds by your convincing, by your argument. But if you will learn first to submit to the power of God, the power of the living God, the power of the righteous, loving, just God, that power can change anything. It can soften the hardest heart. It can transform the hardest mind. God can do that. He can do it to you. He can do it to anyone. He can do it to me. I may not have been extremely hard-hearted, but I was very hard-headed. We don't have to be that way. We can yield to God. Now. This moment. You can receive for yourself the conviction of the Holy Spirit in simplicity and say, Lord, I want to yield to you. Trust me, it is better to be broken by God's hand than by this perverted, twisted, wicked, rebellious world. God's breaking produces fruit. The world will spit you out like trash. All of history says that. God is not going to treat you kindly, necessarily, but He will deal with you with love, with purpose, justly, and with mercy. He's a good God. Lord, I bless these young people. I thank you for their lives. I thank you for the tenderness of their hearts. Lord, I pray for the willingness of their minds, their souls. Lord, that you would touch by your Spirit every heart, that you would draw near to each one. Lord, to whomever in their mind and their heart now is asking you to draw close, that you will do so and soften the hardened places and bring light to darkness. Bring healing to wounds. Willingness where there is resistance. Lord, I ask that for whoever seeks you with their whole heart, that you will readily reveal yourself to them in a living way. And that they will take that as a treasure in life. Thank you for this place, this set apart time that we have to do your will, to consider what your will is, and to learn to put it into practice through our love for one another. We bless your holy name. Amen. Well, I wasn't too much over an hour, so. Hey. Sorry, I talked so much that nobody raised their hand, so. Anybody have anything that they would like to ask? Or?
Yeah, lady is the healer.
There she is. No, really, you guys are free to quench your curiosities. Before you satiate your hunger for lunch. No one, nothing. Well, know that my ears are always open. I don't expect it to be a problem solver for your life, but if there is something of my life that can be of benefit to you, you should each know that I am readily available to you for whatever benefit that can be. I think that we are breaking for lunch. Is that the course we're taking? I'll let Rach handle it.
I think this goes without saying, but it reminded me what you said to Benji last week about, we hear these wonderful things about each other as we're sharing encouraging words and what we see in God in each other. And I was thinking about what you shared in the experiences that you had with the Lord. And as you said, seek the Lord for those things. He wants that for each one of us as his sons, and in connection to coming to one another. If we hear of the testimony of how God has come to, and you've had these experiences, like seek one another in that, ask more. I mean, I know that, as you say, your ears are always open. Like, I know that any of us in this room who have experienced the presence of the Lord, we can't help but be broken again and again as we share it, because it's such it's out of this world, as goofy as that sounds. It's true, and so I just say that, and just as we can take from each other's gifts and benefits, we can also take from those experiences in the Lord when we're curious about them. Like, really seek that out in these people, in the lives of these people around us. Really seek counsel in those things as well, if that's making any sense. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah. What's the lunch plan?